getting started.
Here we go. Hi, I'm ReneMarie from ReneMarie Stroke of Luck. We're really honored and privileged that you took the time today to join us. We have a really important show today. COVID has been the pandemic around the world for the last, I don't know how long, but it's been hitting us for over 70 days. And we didn't hear too much about strokes. And honestly, for my foundation, I felt very hesitant to talk about strokes or bring stroke or our foundation to the forefront when everybody else was so frightened about the world that they lived in at that particular moment. But then a twist came to the virus, that COVID-19 suddenly was attacking, I believe it was young adults, or young uh, people. But we're going to ask the Dr. Libman that today. He's joining us on this show. And if any of you remember, Dr. Libman was on one of our other shows, and he is actually one of our board member, Virginia Warner's neurologists. And they were on one other show. And then on top of everything that has happened with this important topic, another board member of ours, Alicia, who is on as well, just had a TIA this past week. And we're interested to talk to the doctor and just really talk to her about it, because this is all evolving and new. So it really is an important show, because first of all, we want to bring attention to strokes, as we always do, and sudden strokes associated with the COVID. And also we want to maybe talk to the doctor about the fact that maybe a lot of people are having a TIA associated with COVID-19 and not aware of it. Alicia was aware of it because she's been working with us and she's been watching our shows, and she looked at all the signs and she said, yeah, I think I'm having a TIA or a stroke and I need to go to the hospital. So I would really, tell everyone to watch this show, because it really is an important show. But I want to bring attention to one important thing. Today is Judy Marlowe and Andrew's anniversary. So yay, happy anniversary.
Happy anniversary.
And I'll talk to you later, Judy, but happy anniversary. I hope you have a blessed day. And I'm sure Andrew has something all figured out for you guys. But let me introduce everybody. Let's start with Ginny. Ginny is on the bottom in the white. Ginny waved. Hi, Ginny. How are you today?
I'm good, thank you.
Good. Nice to see you. We've been Zooming a few times, but it's nice to see you on the show. And then to the upper, I don't know what you would call it, to my upper right is Dr. Libman, who is Ginny's neurologist. Hi, doctor. How are you today?
Good morning. Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us. We know it's a crazy time of in life, and we know that your time is very valuable. So thank you for joining us. Then to the upper left is Alicia. How are you, Alicia?
Very well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here today.
Good. Nice to see you, and nice to see you at home this scary time. So, Ginny, why don't you share a little bit about your relationship with the doctor so that we could set a trail for our viewers?
Okay, hi, good morning. I had a stroke, an aphasia, 11 years ago now. And I have been working with Dr. Libman. He's been taking very good care of me. I have an annual checkup. They do the Dopplers, and fortunately, everything for the condition that I have has been stable. I was very, very lucky with it. So Dr. Libman and I have an 11-year, relationship as a patient and doctor.
Good. Dr. Libman, how was Ginny's stroke when she initially came to you?
Well, I think Ginny never had very severe deficits, but you always hope that if you're going to have a stroke, you don't have severe deficits. You don't, I should use better language, severe neurological problems from the stroke. And of course, a stroke can be devastating and can turn your life upside down and upend everything and make it impossible for you to take care of yourself, et cetera, et cetera. Some people even bedbound. The important thing about stroke is, of course, if you're going to have a stroke, you want to have a relatively minor stroke. But even having had a minor stroke, it's absolutely essential to figure out just what happened, what caused it, and then take the appropriate preventative measures, because the last thing you want is a second stroke or a recurrent stroke, which then adds to disability. So I think Virginia, has done extraordinarily well. Of course, you'd never know ever that anything actually happened. Just talking to Virginia, watching her, you would never know that anything happened at all.
Right.
And fortunately, for a lot of people, it's like that. And unfortunately, for a lot of other people, the situation is quite different, where strokes can be devastating, totally incapacitating, with subsequent improvement almost always.
Right.
But also reinforces the whole idea. And I'm sorry, going off on little tangents now,
No,
but
that's good.
sooner or later, I'm sure we're going to get to it, as we always do, as it's so important for everybody to know. If you have symptoms, the faster you get to the hospital, the better. The faster you get to the emergency department, the better. Now with two major forms of treatment, I'll just mention a few things, and we can always come back in more detail.
Okay,
But
excellent.
as most people know now, for 25 years, we've had TPA, which is a clot-busting drug that you give through the vein, IV. That was the first approved, proven treatment for stroke when you get in really fast to the emergency department. And then much more recently, in the last few years, what's turned out to be almost miraculous, much more aggressive treatment, but really almost a miraculous treatment for very large strokes. That is for major blockages in the blood supply to the brain, going in with a catheter through the groin, up through the neck, up into the brain, up into the head itself, and retrieving these clots, taking out these blockages, literally pulling them out of the brain and restoring blood flow. And together, the intravenous IV clot buster TPA plus the more mechanical treatment, which is going in with a catheter and pulling out these clots, has resulted in a complete revolution in our ability to treat strokes. Really almost staggering, taking people who very clearly would have been bedbound for the rest of their lives, or perhaps even died of their stroke, and taking a huge percentage of those people and basically restoring them to normal or nearly normal function. Many people going from complete paralysis to virtually walking out of the hospital 2 days later, not even going to rehab. Again, this is something that just, for those of us who have been around, either watching the scene or as neurologists being involved in the care of people who have strokes. It's just so revolutionary. No question, there's more to come, but it's been such a total turnaround in our ability to treat strokes. You look back 25 years ago, you know what it was. It was send flowers, start physical therapy, and keep your fingers crossed and hope for the best. And of course, many people would improve over a few months, over a year, sometimes longer, a very gradual improvement. And that's good, because most people do improve from strokes. Most people do. But nothing like what can result from the treatments we have now.
Wow, it blows me away, that the treatments that you have and the way that you could, have people, go back to their normal lives.
Are all hospitals, Dr. Libman, equipped to do that kind of procedure through the catheter?
So very good question from Ginny. I'll just take it one step back further. Are all hospitals able to give IV TPA is the first step. And the reality is, while most,
right?
That's the clot buster. Exactly. So the clot buster IV TPA is the first line treatment, where you have to get into the hospital very, very quickly and get the drug. Now, the fact is, most, but not all hospitals, even after all this time, can give TPA.
Wow.
And even some hospitals that do give TPA are not necessarily so-called designated stroke centers. There are primary stroke centers and secondary strokes and comprehensive stroke centers. Primary and comprehensive. This is going to get to Ginny's question exactly. But not only do you have to be able to give the drug, you have to be able to show that you can give the drug safely and effectively. That is, you have to give it right. And then you have to show that the hospital is set up, personnel, equipment, all the resources to properly take care of those patients after you give the drug. That is what's known as stroke designation by either a statewide, like, for example, the New York State Department of Health designates certain hospitals as primary stroke centers. Right. All the hospitals, all 23 hospitals in Northwell, for example, are designated primary stroke centers, meaning you can give you can give the drug safely, and you know how to treat the patients afterwards. So those are primary stroke centers. Then Ginny's question.
Dr.
Yeah.
Libman, let me just add something
Yeah.
in that I think is really important that everybody realizes, that see all the things the hospital has to do, which actually extends the time, that the waiting time to have those clot busters put in. And there really is a window of time. My point in being is that you need to get to the hospital as soon as you think you could be suffering a stroke, like Alicia did, because Alicia had a TIA this week, and she looked and she didn't feel well, and she actually went to the hospital. She called her doctor and then went to the hospital ASAP. And that really is an important piece, is to those time. What is a time frame? And I'll let you get back to what you're going to say, but I know it used to be 4.5 hour window. What is it? Was it still 4.5 hours, or has it extended some?
Okay. So, okay. And I'm going to answer that, and then we'll just finish off the hospitals and who can deliver what care, because I know we really should cover all of it. But the time frame, of course, is essential. It's an unbelievably important issue. For the clotbuster IV TPA, it's super interesting. So I'll have to elaborate a little bit. Technically, the 4.5 hour window is still there. So that means, pretty darn quickly, because of course it's going to take you a little time to get to the hospital and all that. Calling 911 is still probably the best way to do it. I know many people, especially if the symptoms are not severe, of course it's tempting to jump in your own car and drive, or get someone to drive you. And, it's an option. But I can tell you that study after study has shown that when you do you call 911, come by ambulance, A, you tend to come a little faster, and B, all hospitals are kind of set up in a way that when you come in by ambulance and you come in by car, you may be having the same symptoms, but the infrastructure, the way the setup is of the process, it goes a little bit faster if you actually have come in by 911, you've been brought in by ambulance. So there is generally encouragement to call 911, come into the hospital. Okay, so that's the 4.5 hour window.
I have a comment about what you just said, because I think it's important to tie things together. Is in our foundation always states, when you call 911, that you're to tell them it could be a stroke, because then they go into stroke mode, and they will call the hospital, set them up for a CAT scan or whatever is determined that is needed, and you'll go right past triage, and you'll get the necessary test done for you in an expedient time. Am I correct in my thought process?
That is 100% correct, and it's a concept that's known as pre-notification. And actually, it's one of the kind of, not exactly regulations, but sort of stipulations now for stroke center designation. You have to be set up with a system that's called pre-notification, so that as soon as the EMS gets on the scene, they call their dispatcher. The dispatcher will then call the hospital and say, we have a stroke coming in. And it's not just a matter of CAT scan and that kind of thing. Believe it or not, the stroke team, that is, let's say, a stroke neurologist, in some of our hospitals, a neurology resident, the emergency department personnel, doctors, nurses, physician's assistants, etc. Everybody's notified in advance. So when there's quote unquote pre-notification, which is what you're referring to, it gets us all mobilized, so that very often we can be in the emergency department waiting, so that as soon as the person arrives with a stroke, it's not a matter of then saying, let's call a stroke alert, as we call it at North Shore and LIJ, a code stroke. We call it at Northwell, code stroke. So then everybody has to rush down. It's still only a few more minutes, but who wants to lose a few minutes, even 3 minutes, when you can be in the emergency department already waiting? So that's pre-notification. 4.5 hour window for the clot busting drug, TPA. But guess what? I do have to tell you. There were some recent studies showing that, for example, if you wake up with your stroke, we have a big problem.
You
If
don't know
you
how long.
wake up and you try to get out of bed and you have trouble getting out of bed, or you fall to the floor because you're weak or paralyzed on one side, then you turn to your bed partner, for example, and you try to talk and you suddenly find you're slurring your words. Okay, now you're having trouble with your speech and you have weakness on your right side of your body, as an example. A classical stroke presentation. Trouble is, it was there when you woke up in the morning. Now what? You were fine when you went to bed, but did it happen 10 minutes after you fell asleep?
Yeah.
Did it happen 10
Yeah.
minutes before you woke up?
Yeah.
Until very recently, every single person with that kind of scenario, which by the way is at least 20% of all people who have strokes, at least 20%.
They have it at night, 20%
At night,
at night?
exactly. It happens at night. It happens during sleep. You wake up with your stroke. Nobody has any idea if it's a 10-minute-old stroke or if it's an 8-hour-old stroke, just as an example. And then you come into the emergency department, we say, oh, we throw our arms up in the air. Everybody gets upset. When it just comes to IV TPA, the clot-busting drug, can't use it. So guess what? With some careful studies over the last several years, it turns out that if you can get a very quick MRI, so not as accessible as a CAT scan, because CAT scans are usually right in the emergency department.
Okay,
You can
right.
usually get a 5-minute CAT scan done super quickly. MRIs are a little less accessible. They're often in use. They are often much slower. Sometimes it's hard to get people into MRIs if they're a little agitated. You move around in an MRI, you're a little restless, boom, the whole picture's blurry. You can't tell what the hell's going on. And if you happen to have claustrophobia, if any of you have had MRIs, it's like going into this closed little tunnel, being sealed in a little closet. You can't move. There are a lot of people out there with claustrophobia. Again, they just can't tolerate it. So there are some issues. But let me tell you that studies have now clearly shown, if you can get an MRI quickly, there are certain sequences, certain ways of looking at the MRI where you can tell, even though the person is unable to tell you when it started. Because let's say, for example, they woke up with their stroke. There's no way they can tell you that it happened 3 hours ago, 1 hour ago, or 7 hours ago. You can look at the MRI now, and we're able to see whether it happened within the last 4.5 hours. There are certain changes on the MRI which allow us to tell. Now, this is kind of hot off the presses, so I don't want anyone to rush into an emergency department, God forbid, tonight and say, or tomorrow morning, I demand to have an MRI, because it's taking a little time to get reorganized, of course, so it's not sort of instantaneously available. But it has been endorsed by the American Heart Association and the American Stroke Association in national guidelines that it's reasonable. In other words, there's enough scientific evidence to say that this is the next step in treatment with IV-TPA, the clot-busting drug, that we may be able to broaden the window that way, because otherwise we have no way to know. So it's the next step. Don't look for it tomorrow, but almost definitely within the next year. Hold on, I'll just click on that. Something appeared on the screen there. It's not going to appear tomorrow, but you're going to see probably over the next year, there'll be a reorganization of hospitals to say, we've got to start making those MRIs available immediately, like at the snap of a fingers, the way you do a CAT scan. Again, it's not that easy. There aren't that many MRIs. There are usually more CAT scans than MRIs, but it's going to be done. And it will allow us shortly to start taking people, for example, who wake up with their strokes and say, well, I know you can't tell us when you had the stroke because you woke up with it, but now we can get you into this MRI quickly and we'll know whether you're eligible or you're not eligible, and then we can treat you. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was thinking that can't the hospital, I mean, while they're resetting up, can't the ambulance determine or be notified of what hospitals have MRIs for cases that happen? It's only 20%, so it's not a big case. So I'm just saying, like, because I have 3 or 4 hospitals around me, so if only one of them is set up with an MRI, when it happens in the morning, the ambulance should let the family know, like, we're going to take them here because they have an MRI set up for you.
It's a very good point. I must tell you, I mean, it's an excellent point. The thing is, even the hospitals with the MRIs, most of our hospitals have MRIs, not all. One thing is actually having the machine. And the other is being set up to get the patient there quickly. And as opposed to CAT scans, like most emergency departments now have CAT scans right in the emergency department. Sometimes they're a little away from the emergency department, but not too far away. Often with MRIs, the way they're built and the shielding, remember they're big magnets, you know, they're just a little different from CAT scans. They're in sort of separate facilities or separate parts of the hospital. It could take you 10 minutes just to get the person there, to get the patient there with stroke. There's a little more involved, and it would also mean, don't forget, and this is sort of bringing in the economics of the way hospitals and the whole healthcare system is set up. For example, a lot of hospitals are doing more elective MRIs even during the night or the early morning hours, or maybe bringing in outpatients during that time who want to come in at 6 o'clock in the morning, 7 o'clock in the morning before work. It's the only time they can get their MRIs done. And then suddenly, and remember, an MRI can take half an hour or longer.
Yes.
So suddenly you're going to have to tell hospitals, again, it's not just a matter of the equipment. Hey, stop doing all your MRIs during this time. Block all of your services you're giving to some people maybe who are in the hospital already who need it. All these outpatients who still need their MRIs, maybe they've got brain tumors and things like that. Right. And the only time they can come is 7 o'clock in the morning. And that's when they're going to come. And that's where they've made their appointments. And you're suddenly going to tell all these hospitals, stop providing this service for X number of patients and people so we can keep it open on the off chance that maybe once a week or once, who knows what, somebody's going to come in. You know, you could just see that there are so many considerations. In the best of all possible worlds, we'd have an MRI available 24 hours a day, sitting in the emergency department, bring everyone in. Right. But you can see it's not all that simple. Hospitals have to retune the infrastructure, the way that they're sort of their whole process, the whole way of doing things, basically, including how they're going to reserve a machine in great demand for many different reasons, neurological and otherwise, for the occasional patient who's going to come in to that particular hospital at 7 o'clock in the morning because they awoke at 6 o'clock. So again, I don't want to sound like a Debbie Downer, but I'm telling you,
you're just like, you know, it's new or hot off the press. You know, it's hot off the press. So I know we have, you know, we have so many things that we really want to touch on, and we only have another 35 minutes. And I really want, and Ginny, if you don't mind, if we have time at the end, the doctor will go back to answering your question about the hospitals. But this show was really about two things, the COVID and the strokes. Okay. And I really think it's important, and how TIAs like Alicia had shared. I'm going to let Alicia say a little bit about how she was feeling, and you know, not officially, doctor, but you know, see if you could tie it in to the COVID. I mean, do you think it has anything to COVID? Ginny, Alicia, can you give us a little bit of details about, you know,
absolutely,
how you were feeling?
Well, in the middle of the night, I had a severe headache that woke me up. I turned over to my partner, to Alan, and I told him, I have a horrible headache. It's killing me. And he suggested I get up and take a Tylenol, which I did. And I went back to bed with this. I never had a headache like this. It was very severe. I went to bed, and when I woke up in the morning, I was a bit dizzy, and I still had the headache. And I went over and we had breakfast, and then I was sitting down in the kitchen table, and I started speaking with Alan, and I noticed that I was having problems with my eye. My eye was hurting me, my right eye. And I told him the eye was really hurting me. As I was looking at a word game, I noticed that I lost the picture on my right eye. And I blinked and I tried getting the picture back, and a few seconds it came back, but it was very blurry. And then I started getting, my face was very numb. The right side of my face was very numb. Then I noticed that my arms were numb and my leg was numb. And that's when I told Alan, I think I might be having a stroke. And he said to me, oh, no, it's probably not that, blah, blah, blah. And I said, I really think so. I think that's the symptoms. So I ran over to the ReneMarie information that I had, and I looked through it, and it seemed like it was a stroke. And I called my doctor, and I told him what the symptoms were, and he said to me, "It sounds like you're having a stroke. Why don't you get to the emergency room immediately?" Which I did. And then once I was in the emergency room, they evaluated me. They sent me to triage, and they started evaluating me and seeing if I can, if I was, if I really had a stroke or whatever. And then finally they took me in. They did a CAT scan. They did an EKG, and then they monitored me for a while, and then they came back into the room and said that it seemed, from the testing that they did, it seemed that I was fine, that if I had a stroke, it had passed, and I can go home within an hour or so while they still monitored me. So I was there a few hours. I would say anywhere from 4 to 5 hours. And then I came home. I still had the headache. They gave me aspirins to take. I still had the headache, and I've had the headache for a couple more days after that. But I'm feeling a little better now. Thank God.
So, doctor, my question to you after her, how do you tie the COVID into the sudden stroke?
Okay, so that's a great question. And so one thing is exactly what happened to, is it Alicia or Alice?
Alicia.
Okay. Because on your little box, it's actually so Alicia, so one thing is that the more specific question is what happened to you, and that's a whole other question. And there are strokes and TIAs, and then there are mimics of strokes and TIAs. So not everything that looks like a TIA or a stroke is a TIA or a stroke, and that's the job of the neurologist and to a degree the emergency department staff, and especially the job of neurologist, figure it out, because some things mimic strokes and TIAs, and you always have to know, and that guides you and then tells you what appropriate treatments, approaches to take to prevent something serious in the future. So that's a whole other topic, but very important. And some people would say it's a stroke or a TIA until proven otherwise, but still consider that there are conditions that mimic strokes and TIAs, and make sure you do the right investigations. And we can always talk about that separately. Now, the whole concept of COVID is absolutely fascinating, and that's what everybody's interested in. And I know everybody's been following, and probably everybody knows people who have gotten it, and sometimes it's mild, and you just kind of have a little bit of a flu, a little bit, or a little aches and pains or loss of smell, as some people know suddenly happens, and you get over it and you're fine. And other people have trouble breathing and get pneumonia, and then the certain number will get severely affected and have to be in ICUs and on ventilators, etc. So there's this huge spectrum. The one thing that has become clear with COVID-19, this new coronavirus, is that it seems to do a couple of things. It seems to have an effect on your blood to make the blood clot more easily. Mm-hmm. And it seems to have an effect on blood vessels themselves, which can make blood clots form in the blood vessels, or sometimes make the blood vessels leaky, so that instead of blocking off, they leak and cause bleeding. And from the neurological standpoint and from the stroke standpoint, how that has manifested and how that has come out now in observations and studies from across the world is that there seems to be a strong association with clotting of blood when people have COVID. Usually it's in people who have severe COVID virus infection. For example, the highest risk for a stroke would be in someone who has severe COVID in the hospital, That is, they were bad enough to come into the hospital because they were not breathing well. It doesn't mean they necessarily have to be on a ventilator or something like that.
Right,
But if
right.
they're bad enough to come into the hospital, as opposed to just saying, okay, you're not feeling well, feels a little flu-like or like a bad cold, you don't have to come in. The highest risk for stroke and COVID-19 is for those people who have severe COVID-19, admitted to the hospital, pneumonia, trouble breathing, or maybe even in an ICU on a ventilator. Having said that, it does seem that even people with mild COVID, a little shortness of breath, nothing too severe, some aches and pains, a little fatigue, they're staying in bed, including young people. And by young people, I mean those in their 20s and 30s. And I'm speaking both from the literature and the studies that have been published and from our own experience at, for example, LIJ and Northwell, where we've been seeing more and more of these types of people. For example, a 25-year-old, a little cough, a little fever over a week, nothing severe, didn't need to be hospitalized, comes in with a stroke due to blockage, looking just like the average 85-year-old who might have come in with that same stroke, and sometimes bleeding in the brain. One thing that's become obvious also with COVID-19 when it comes to stroke is that there can be even more severe types of strokes. For example, when most people have a stroke, you have a stroke due to a blockage in one blood vessel affecting a certain part of the brain, and you come in with some specific symptoms. For example, slurring of speech, weakness on one side of your body, one part of your brain affected. What we've seen more with COVID these days is people coming in with a blockage in 2 or 3 major blood vessels in different parts of your brain at the same time. A blood clot here, a blood clot there, a blood clot in the third place, coming in, for example, with 3 strokes at the same time. Major disability with just devastating consequences. Sometimes we've seen people coming in with simultaneous a blockage type of stroke, and then in another part of the brain, a bleeding type of stroke. Now, all these things can happen to anybody with bad strokes. What I'm saying is we're observing and documenting and keeping track of people who are coming in more frequently with these unusual and unusually severe types of strokes. So what we're seeing with COVID-19, more frequent strokes, more strokes in young people, the worst strokes in those with very severe COVID-19, meaning you're already hospitalized. And then these unusual presentations of stroke, not just one blockage, but several blockages at the same time. Or not just a blockage, but a blockage and bleeding in the brain at the same time. All can happen, but unusual, but more common with COVID.
Can this be in conjunction possibly with heart attack? Because the clots can cause heart attacks too.
And the clots can definitely cause heart attacks, and there may be damage to the heart at the same time, even without a heart attack. In other words, the virus can damage the heart even without a blockage in the blood supply to the heart. You can get a virus, the COVID-19 virus, that damages the heart. And it's an excellent question. What we're seeing are clots all over the body, so that you can come in with your stroke. You may have a heart attack. What we're seeing even more frequently are blood clots in the legs, so-called the veins of the legs, so-called DVT, deep vein thrombosis. So they're coming in with a clot in the brain, a blockage in the brain, blockage in the veins of the heart. And either through the virus or through blood clots, damage to the kidneys, damage to the liver, damage to the spleen, plus minus damage to the heart, and of course, damage to the lungs, which is what everybody knows about. Why they're coming in with pneumonia, why is it that we can't help them all with ventilators? Why can't we help them all with ventilators? They seem to have blood clots forming in the little sacs of their lungs, so that you can jam as much oxygen into their lungs as you want with a ventilator. It's not going anywhere because there are blood clots sort of clogging up their lungs. So Ginny's question is exactly correct. There are blood clots everywhere. And that's why people are looking, and what we and others are investigating is whether we should be much more aggressive when someone comes in with COVID-19 and, let's say, a stroke, or maybe they're just coming in with pneumonia. Should we be much more aggressive with blood thinning medications right from the beginning, even if we don't see blood clots right from the beginning, or they have a stroke? Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, because it appears what you're saying is that this virus causes blockages. So that would be the next step, is to prevent the blockages from the start, to be proactive in their recovery or their care.
That is 100% correct. And everybody thinks that's probably the right thing to do. And here's the catch-22. The catch-22, especially for neurologists and especially for stroke, is, remember, it's a double-edged sword. And it's very, very odd that not only does this virus tend to promote clotting, it also affects the lining of the blood vessels that can itself promote clotting, but can also cause leaky blood vessels that can promote bleeding, so that you can begin to get blood leaking through. So we'd love to rush in like cowboys. Yes, that's exactly it. And it's a balance. And I'm holding up my hand in the little box that I can see, so everybody can see. It is a balance between blockage and the risk of bleeding. We could be cowboys and clobber everybody. We could even give them TPA. Some people are saying, believe it or not, even forget TPA for strokes, give TPA for pneumonia, because part of the pneumonia is these blood clots forming and sort of jamming up your oxygen exchange in your lungs. Give everybody TPA. Put them on heparin, put them on other blood thinning medications. But especially when it comes to strokes, the last thing we want to do is cause bleeding in the brain. If the person happened to come in with blockage, do we want to cause bleeding? Because we know that their blood vessels are not, the integrity of their blood vessels is not normal. And they may bleed just as they may form a blood clot. So we have to be extraordinarily careful. Right now, we are erring on the side of being slightly more aggressive. And if they've come in with a blockage, we've worked out a protocol based on reviewing the literature that's out there in the whole world. And we are being a little bit more aggressive. And we're looking at them, people who come in with strokes or multiple strokes at the same time, and we see just blockages, no sign of bleeding. Instead of just putting people on a simple aspirin, let's say, as we used to, which is very effective to prevent second strokes in many, many people, we are actually using stronger blood thinning medication and sending patients home for 1 month during what we think is a high risk period for more blood clots on stronger blood thinning medication.
Wow.
And then if everything's quiet, good, you've done well. We don't think that high risk for blockages and blood clots is going to last forever. You're over the virus. Let's switch you over to something simpler, probably safer in the long run, something like simple aspirin, something like that, aspirin, Plavix, etc. But we've had to change our protocol and the way we are thinking about it, because COVID-19 patients who have strokes are clearly different from the average patient we had just 3-4 months ago with stroke, but without COVID-19.
Yeah. Now I have two thoughts. First of all, maybe there's a lot of COVID patients who have had strokes and they didn't even determine it because they're so involved in this horrific virus that, it's probably just through the process. It's just been so intense, because I understand that the best way to determine whether somebody has a blockage is through taking blood. Now, if you don't take blood for that specific cause or that specific reason, then you don't determine whether they have blood clots. Am I correct in my thought process? Or
now, when you say blockage, are you referring to blockage in the brain, as in a stroke, or are you referring to blockage anywhere in the body, like a DVT, like a vein blockage or something like that?
No, I wouldn't. I mean, whatever causes a stroke, right?
So the stroke is a little bit different. I mean, the stroke, someone comes in suddenly with half their body paralyzed and unable to speak. okay, we know automatically there's
Right.
something going on in the brain. That we know. There's something going on in the brain. If it came on suddenly, it's not very likely to be a brain tumor. It's not very likely to be an infection in the brain.
Right.
It's not very likely to be another condition like multiple sclerosis as a young patient, a young person might get, or something else. So something that happens, boom, you snap your fingers. 1 minute you're okay. The next minute you're paralyzed on one side. Chances are it's a stroke. Of the two types of strokes, blockage or bleeding, if you're there in the emergency department getting your CAT scan very quickly as we want you to be, often the blockages don't show up. The damage done by a blockage doesn't show up for at least a few hours, 6 hours, 12 hours. You may not see it, but bleeding shows up immediately.
Right.
Tiny amounts of bleeding you can see right away. So you use judgment. So we don't need blood tests specifically for that. You come in with those symptoms, we do the CAT scan, don't see any blood 99 times out of 100, not 100% of the time, but 99% of the time we're going to be right. And it's going to be a blockage in the brain, and it's going to be a stroke due to blockage, not bleeding, and not something else. Although, as I said before, always be careful. And I just have to say it as a matter of general education. There are other conditions that mimic stroke, and it is the job of the neurologist to figure that out and make sure we're doing the right thing. Now, the interesting thing about COVID-19, since you do mention the blood test, is especially when patients are sick with COVID-19. And again, I just mean reasonably sick.
Ask this question.
Yeah. Well, now you've come in with pneumonia or something else, and you're reasonably sick, as opposed to the person who barely feels anything, and they're sitting out there in the community, and they have a day of maybe some mild muscle aches and a little fever, and it vanishes, and they're fine. Put those people aside for a second. But now you're sick enough to come into the hospital, let's say with or without a stroke, and you're really feeling unwell, and you're a little short of breath. There's all kinds of changes in the blood that take place that seem to indicate that you are clotting. So that is not exactly what we would do for stroke to prove that there's a stroke or there's not a stroke, because we have other ways, just using clinical judgment and CAT scans, sometimes MRIs, etc. But if you already have formed a small blood clot in your vein of your leg and you don't know it, or you have a tendency to form clots because you are now infected with a somewhat bad COVID-19, the answer is yes. There are changes in your blood of various measures that you would not see in the average stroke patient that say, hey, this blood test is usually twice normal in a stroke patient, but in a COVID-19 patient, it's 10 times normal. Certain measures of blood clotting are now 10 times normal in the COVID-19 patient. And in the average stroke patient, they're maybe twice normal. So there's something really wrong. And that'll give you a clue that this patient may not be, or even though no fever, no shortness of breath, no muscle aches, no loss of smell or taste, the things that you've been reading about that give you a clue that there's COVID-19 going on, that they're infected, but the blood work can help. Now, that blood work doesn't necessarily come back in 10 minutes. You got to draw the blood, and you may have to wait quite a few hours or till the next day before you know. So there's not all this blood work that you can suddenly say it's going to change your decision in that first half an hour that you have. Is this a stroke? Is it not a stroke? Are you going to treat with TPA or no? Are you going to treat with a catheter-based treatment? Pull that clot out. No, a lot of that is bread and butter stroke neurology. We still have to make our decisions. But if you have COVID and we can test you, and don't forget, you've come into the emergency department, we can still do that unpleasant nasal swab nobody really likes. It's not a perfect test, but you can do that very, very quickly in anybody, including those coming in with stroke. Do a nasal swab, check for the virus. Nowadays, you know, it comes back much faster than before. You don't have to wait a week or a day. You can wait hours, and the newest one's 15 minutes.
Wow.
And get a result for COVID-19. Sometimes, go ahead.
No, I was going to ask Alicia. Alicia, did you have a COVID test?
No, they didn't do a COVID test at all.
Do you think you should get one? I'm just asking. I don't know.
No, only because I haven't had any of those symptoms. I did have symptoms of that months ago, before it all came to a head. It was in January or February it was in December that I got ill. And it was really, really bad, cold, a chest cold, and I had all the symptoms, I guess, of COVID, but I didn't know. And when I went to my doctor and he checked, he said I had a virus.
Wow.
And he told me,
COVID
go
is
home,
the virus.
who knows if I
No,
had
I'm
it
just
earlier
saying.
on.
You know what the truth is, and I'll let you address that in 2 seconds, doctor. But the truth is, I have a prayer circle every Friday night, and one of the people on the prayer circle was talking about that 2 people she knows had COVID back in January before it was so prominent, and that was what we were calling it. So, doctors, tell us your thoughts.
Of course, it is impossible to know, and everybody keeps pushing back the time that COVID first appeared in this country. Maybe there were a few cases. January, December is getting a little bit early. The fact is, I think in December and even January, it was still extremely, extremely rare. One of the traps that everybody falls into, including doctors, is once there's something new and scary around, and most people are still kind of scared of COVID, you have to resist the temptation to attribute every symptom and everything that happens to COVID-19, because there are still a lot of other conditions out there, medical conditions, neurological conditions, etc., that are not due to COVID-19. And again, you don't want to be barking up the wrong tree. In Alicia's case, going back to December, my guess would be far more likely that it was a bad cold or even a mild flu. The average, the normal flu.
Right.
I think that'd be far, far more likely. I think in Alicia's case, probably much less likely to have been COVID-19 related. And, so then you go off and you get a test for someone who never really had symptoms of the disease. And then how do you interpret it? It sort of muddies the waters a little bit. I would like to say for Alicia, she needs a good neurological workup. Let's figure out what's going on. Was it a TIA, minor stroke, or something that mimics one of those conditions? Work it up and make sure we do the right thing to prevent any trouble in the future.
Right.
But I think in this case, in Alicia's case, probably not COVID-19 related. And usually what we're seeing and what it seems to be the case, when you think a stroke is related to COVID-19, usually the person does have fairly clear-cut symptoms of COVID-19. Of course, they can be less severe, they can be more severe, and you have to figure it out and do the right thing in terms of treatment of the underlying condition. Treat the COVID, treat the stroke, but usually not out of the blue. And someone who's just walking around, oh, you have a little minor stroke. Well, it could be COVID-19, but you haven't had any symptoms of COVID-19. Usually that's not going to be the case.
Right.
So don't go barking up the wrong tree. Be careful.
And I really want to, we have a couple minutes left, and I really want to end this on, this is an important topic. The topic that you had mentioned that you were seeing less and less stroke patients in the hospital. And that scares me because people were so frightened about the COVID that they didn't go to the hospital when they needed to. And because it's frightening. You just didn't know. It was you didn't know if you were going to go with a possible stroke and wind up with COVID, and you're weak. Your body, your immune system is weak once you have a stroke. So talk to us about that, and talk to us about the importance. Let's end this show on the importance of getting to the hospital within that window, like Alicia did and Ginny did, and talk to us about that.
100%. And so there was this unusual phenomenon all across the country and probably across the world. If you look at the literature from Italy, from various places, as COVID-19 sort of swept through the population, all hospitals saw a drop in the number of patients that we would normally see with strokes. And the same thing held actually for heart attacks and other serious conditions. But here we're focusing on stroke. And suddenly the number of people who are having strokes seem to be dropping off in the emergency department. Didn't make any sense whatsoever, because nobody thinks that COVID-19 cures strokes.
Right.
The opposite, as what we've been referring to this for the last half hour, probably the opposite, because it causes problems with clotting and it causes problems with blood vessels. So probably stroke is an important complication of COVID-19. COVID-19 doesn't cure strokes, and yet far fewer people with stroke were coming in as we were seeing the emergency department sort of having this wave of people coming in with COVID-19. shortness of breath, pneumonia, etc. So
Right.
what was going on? Nobody's entirely sure, but at least a part of the explanation, and possibly the whole explanation, is that unfortunately people were afraid to come in because they thought they would catch COVID-19 in the hospital, in the emergency department. A terrible, terrible shame, because the fact is the emergency departments know this very well. They're taking appropriate precautions. They're isolating the COVID patients. As soon as COVID-19 is suspected in anybody, that person is isolated, whether they're in the emergency department or they're already in the hospital. The chances of someone coming in with a problem such as stroke, not having COVID-19, and just kind of nonchalantly, sort of cavalierly, you put them in a stretcher next to someone who happens to have COVID-19, they get coughed on or whatever. Next thing you know, that person with stroke has COVID-19. That doesn't happen. It does not happen. Everybody's very sensitive to that, and we're being very careful to separate those patients with COVID-19 from those patients who don't have COVID-19, whether you have a stroke or you don't have a stroke. So all hospitals being very careful not to allow that kind of transmission in the hospital. And what your point is exactly is that if people are afraid of coming in, you're not going to get proper treatment for stroke, as we discussed. Still 4.5 hours.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Within that window, whether it's 4.5 hours, we didn't go into the longer time window for the clot retrieval, mechanical clot retrieval using catheters. Nonetheless, doesn't matter whether you're coming in for IVTPA or a catheter going in. It's the earlier you treat, the better. So it's not a matter of focusing on 4.5 hours or focusing on 6 hours or focusing on even longer, as I think we touched on longer with a catheter where you can pull clots out sometimes safely and effectively in an even longer time window. That doesn't matter. Just because you may have a 4.5 hour time window doesn't mean you come in at 4 hours and 4 hours and 29 minutes. You don't do that, because you tend to do better if you're treated at 2 hours than if you're treated at 4.5 hours. And you tend to do better if you're treated at 5 hours than at 6 hours, say with a catheter to pull out the clot. So if you happen to have symptoms of COVID-19, or you, especially in this, what you're asking, you don't have symptoms of COVID-19, you're afraid of it, but you have sudden paralysis, sudden loss of speech, sudden numbness on one side of your body, or maybe, as Alicia said, sudden trouble with your vision on one side, or it could be sudden difficulty walking. Those are probably the main symptoms of stroke. They come on suddenly. Don't delay. Don't be afraid you're going to catch COVID-19 in the hospital, because almost definitely you won't. And the benefits of coming in quickly far outweigh any risks in terms of getting treated for your stroke. That's what we have to encourage you to do. Come in so you can get treated.
And let's go back to what we stated in the beginning was calling the ambulance would be the best way, because at least they'll know what they're dealing with when you're on the way to the hospital. Aside from dealing with the stroke, they'll be able to social distance you at a proper manner, rather than when you go into the hospital. I don't know about waiting rooms and all that kind of stuff, what they're doing in the hospitals, but I just think it'd be a more structured way to get to the hospital and to get into the hospital in a social distance manner.
100%. Call 911. They'll bring you in, and you won't wait in the waiting room if that's what you're afraid of, and social distancing, as you mentioned. You will go straight from that stretcher on the ambulance to the CAT scan. You won't even stop to get registered in the emergency department. You won't even stop to go to a little booth, one of those little rooms in the emergency. You will go straight to the CAT scan. That is our protocol. That gets answers much faster and gets treatment going much, much faster. We try to do the same things with people who walk in or who drive in, but it's never quite as efficient. So call 911. And with all due respect also to Alicia, I believe you called your doctor, described your symptoms. He or she then said, okay, sounds like a stroke. Listen, half the time you can't reach your doctor right away. You get an answering service. They page the doctor. Don't do that. It wastes time. That's what we're trying to say. You were smart enough. You already figured it out yourself. You knew what it was. Sudden onset of weakness, paralysis, numbness, trouble speaking, trouble with vision, trouble walking. All those things are signs and symptoms of stroke. You don't even have to call your doctor, with all due respect to primary care doctors. That's not the goal of what we're trying to do. That slows you down even a little bit. call 911 and come to the emergency department by ambulance as quickly as possible.
Yes.
You don't have to phone anyone. Call 911.
Yeah. And Ginny, you want do you and I'm sorry I pulled this out, but do you want to do the Be Fast really quickly to share that with everybody?
Yeah, it was fast. And last time you were on, Dr. Libman, you said it's now added Be Fast. So it's balance, eyes, face, arms, speech, and time.
That is 100% it. And look how it does overlap with Alicia as well. Eyes are in there.
Mhm.
Any
Yes.
difficulty with vision could be a sign of stroke. Balance, you suddenly are losing your balance. Walking as if you're drunk when you haven't been drinking and suddenly you're staggering. You have some trouble with your balance, with your walking. Eyes, we mentioned. Face is the classical thing where you're smiling, one side goes up, the other side drooping down.
Yeah.
Everybody notices that. It's so striking. That's a sign. And you can do that with your family. You can do that with friends. And arms, just have the person say, lift up your arms. Just raise your arms. One tends to drift downwards, or one has trouble lifting up altogether. Perfect sign. And speech, as we mentioned over and over again, any trouble with speech, slurring, suddenly you can't find the words, or understanding other people's speech. That's all speech. Classical, when comes on suddenly, sign of stroke. And then time, because as a reminder, time is brain. Time is brain. And every minute that there is a blocked major blood vessel to your brain results in the death of 1.9 million brain cells.
Wow.
Every single minute, almost 2 million. And we have a lot of brain cells. Fortunately, we have billions, but you don't want to lose almost 2 million brain cells every minute. You don't want to delay. That's the time in there. Time is brain. Call 911.
Wow, great way to end the show. And I just want to remind everybody that when you do call the ambulance or the hospital or the ambulance, the 911, you share with them that it could be possibly a stroke. It's just so important to get that ambulance in stroke mode. They'll call the hospital if it's determined that you could possibly have a stroke, and they will set everything. Time is of the essence. We are so lucky. Thank you, Ginny, for introducing us to Dr. Libman. It's incredible. Love working with you, and I love your enthusiasm and your dedication, and just you're on the cutting edge of things. And we are so honored. And I'd love to invite you back to continue the conversation. What Ginny was talking about with the hospitals, and after, while we're in this what is it called? We're influcted with this COVID right now. It's really important for us to stay on top of things. So we'd love to invite you back.
I would love to come back, and I love talking to you and to the audience. It's my pleasure every year. I wish we could cover more. Next time, let's do a 5-hour interview. I'm sure we can do it. Maybe we'll cover half of what we have to cover. But it's a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Next, before we cut out, Alicia is Alicia's Spanish. What nationality are you, Alicia?
Well, I was born here, but my parents are from Puerto Rico, and I also have Spanish from Spain, my grandmother.
Great. So Judy and I had done a Knowledge is Power, which is, we got almost 15,000 views on Facebook alone. So we're really happy that people were noticed, that we really cared about providing information, and we're going to add Be Fast to the slide as well, Doctor. We'll put your name on the bottom, that you were the one that came up with that. But now,
not my invention. No, not your
invention, but your thought to add that to, because it's important for people to realize that we're not doing this alone. We have experts and we have doctors that we work with, and we're partners with the American Stroke Association. And our goal and objective with my foundation is to bring knowledge and awareness and to bring hope to those that have suffered strokes, and to prevent strokes from happening. Because like we said, 80% of strokes can be prevented, or at least reverted back to a normal way of life after you've suffered a stroke, which is spoken about today. But now we're going to touch on a new, we're going to broaden our network. we're going to do a knowledge power show in Spanish, because I am Cuban. My grandmother and my mother were from Cuba, and Alicia is Puerto Rican. Your nationality is from
Yes.
There you go. And so we're going to do a whole hour show in Spanish.
Okay.
So,
I'm going to sign off. Thank you, Dr. Libman.
No, wait. We're gonna close out. We're gonna
close first.
We're gonna close out. We're gonna close out because we always like to do them in show segments. So I just wanted to share with everybody what we're going to be doing next. So we're really excited. Ginny, do you want to share anything with the doctor, please? Did you want to share anything with the doctor? Because I know I just cut you off.
No. Who, me?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. No, I'll see you hopefully one way or another after the first of the year. I have to call him. It's no point.
Yeah. Oh, you're talking about the doctor. Okay.
Very good.
So thank you so much, everybody. On 3, we always blow kisses because we want hope and blessings to everybody around the world. And this show does go around the world. So we're so blessed. And Jim, thank you so much for, doing the back end from Long Island. And happy anniversary to Judy once again. And we'll see you in a few minutes. Let's blow kisses. 1, 2, 3. Bye, everybody. See you in a few minutes. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Yo no entiendo por qué tú más de nadie sabe qué pasó en mi vida. Yo no sé qué tú piensas, yo no sé lo que haré, yo no sé lo que estoy perdiendo, yo no sé lo que va a pasar. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti, no me puedes oír llorar. El día que caminaste por la puerta, todas las memorias fueron. Mi corazón está vacío, como si tuviera ayer. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. Mi corazón está sufriendo. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. No me puedes oír llorar.
You were standing there listening to me. It's like, I was going to tell you anything. Yes.
Usted está en mi sueño por la noche. Por favor, no esperemos. Y es tan difícil para mí y para ti. Yo, ¿qué puedo hacer? No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. Mi corazón está sufriendo. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. No me puedes oír llorar. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. Mi corazón está sufriendo. No me puedes escuchar llorar solo sin ti. No me puedes